Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've ever stared at a complex binary phase diagram, with all the lines, the different fields, the invariant points, and just wondered, what is the actual engine driving all of that geometry?
Hmm.
Then you are definitely in the right place. Today, we are doing a really focused technical deep dive into, well, the very foundation of material science.
We really are.
Our mission today is to use our source material to unlock the mechanics of those diagrams. We're going to be linking the Gibbs free energy composition curves, the delta GM curves, directly to how binary phase diagrams are made and how we interpret them.
We want to get beyond just memorizing them.
Exactly. We're here to understand why every single line is positioned exactly where it is, purely from a thermodynamics perspective.
And that is the absolute core foundation you need for any upper-level material study. And to, cut through the complexity, it really starts with one single unyielding rule.
Okay, what's that?
In any binary system, if you keep the temperature and pressure constant, the most stable state for that material is always the one that achieves the lowest possible value of the Gibbs free energy of mixing, Jack says.
So that minimum value is the thermodynamic dictator.
It dictates everything. It defines phase stability.
Okay, so let's unpack that, starting with the energy of mixing, GXM itself. When we talk about this energy, we're measuring it relative to the two pure unmixed components, A and B.
Right, which we just assign a Gibbs energy of 0. It's a reference point.
And the classic equation is deg equals RT times XA log AA plus XD log AB.
And that equation is doing a lot of work. It's calculating the net energy change when you combine the entropy, the randomness, with the actual energetic attraction or repulsion between atoms A and B.
The X terms are the mole fractions. It's simple enough, but the A terms, those are the activities.
And if you remember nothing else, remember this. Activity, AI, is the effective concentration. It reflects how much a component wants to react, which is almost never exactly equal to its mole fraction.
Right. And the curves we plot, say DGM versus composition, really show how those two components, A and B, actually interact. And we see, three fundamental types of behavior?
3 basic shapes. Curve I is the ideal solution. Here, activity just equals the mole fraction. That's Raoult's law.
And crucially, the heat of mixing, AGM, is 0.
Meaning A and B atoms don't really care about each other. They don't love or hate each other. The whole curve, that nice downward parabolic shape, is driven entirely by entropy.
But most real systems aren't ideal. So curve 2 shows a positive deviation. What does that mean, conceptually?
It means the components would rather not be near each other. They kind of repel.
So you have to put energy in to mix them.
Exactly, which makes the solution less stable. The AGM curve gets pushed upward. It becomes less negative. And this positive deviation is the thermodynamic engine that drives phase separation.
Ah, so that's where limited solubility comes from.
It sets the stage for it because the system would rather split into 2 phases than stay as one unstable mixture. In this case, the activity is always higher than the mole fraction.
Okay, so if positive deviation drives separation, then curve third, the negative deviation, has to be the opposite. It must mean attraction.
Precisely. The components strongly prefer being together. They actually release energy when you mix them.
Which makes the solution very stable.
Highly stable. The AGM curve is displaced way down, becomes much more negative. This promotes solid solubility, and it can even lead to the formation of stable intermediate compounds. Here, activity is always less than the mole fraction.
Now, here's something our source material highlights that I find fascinating. A constraint on the ends of these curves. Thermodynamics dictates that all of them must have vertical tangents at their extremities.
Yes, where the composition approaches pure A or pure B.
Why is that?
That vertical tangent is a really powerful constraint, and it comes from the logarithmic nature of the entropy term. Just think about what it means.
Okay.
The addition of the very first tiniest amount of component B to pure A causes an instantaneous sharp drop in the Gibbs free energy.
What's the practical indication of that?
It means that achieving a state of absolutely pure A or pure B in a mixed phase is, thermodynamically impossible above 0 Kelvin.
So if you're a metallurgist trying to get to 100% purity,
Thermodynamics is working against you. That vertical tangent guarantees that any solution at a non-zero temperature will have at least a tiny bit of the other element in it, even if it's just one atom.
that's a great way to connect the math back to the real world. So this all brings us to the criterion for phase equilibrium, which is twofold. First, the system minimizes AGM.
Right.
But second, when two phases, say, solid alpha and liquid L coexist, They have to satisfy a core requirement about chemical potential.
Yes, the chemical potential, G, is the partial molar Gibbs free energy. Conceptually, you can think of it as the urge or the escaping tendency that an atom has.
An urge to move or react.
Exactly. And for two phases to coexist stably, that urge has to be equal for every component across both phases.
So if component A has a higher urge to jump out of the solid and into the liquid, it will do so until the urges are equalized.
That's equilibrium. It requires that the chemical potential of component I in phase alpha must equal the chemical potential of I in phase beta. G alpha equals G beta.
And since potential is related to activity,
It means their activities also have to be equal. A alpha equals I beta. And this equality is the critical requirement that we can actually visualize with the common tangent method.
let's visualize that now. Let's see how it actually builds a diagram. We can start simple with a lens phase diagram. We'll assume ideal solutions and complete solubility.
Okay, so we'll set the temperature, T, somewhere between the melting points of A and B. So let's say T is high enough to melt component A, but not B.
So now we have to plot two EGM curves on the same graph.
One for the liquid solution and one for the solid solution.
And their vertical placement is absolutely key here. The start and end points are determined by the stability difference between the pure solid and pure liquid at that specific temperature.
Right, that's the molar Gibbs free energy of melting. AG agreed as this. Since we're above A's melting point, pure liquid A is more stable than solid A.
So the liquid curve starts lower on the left axis.
It starts lower at xb equals 0. And the reverse is true for pure B. This sets the relative heights of the two curves.
And now the famous step, applying the common tangent method to find the equilibrium compositions at this one temperature.
We draw a single straight line that just touches both the liquid curve and the solid curve. It has to be tangent to both.
And those 2 points of contact,
They define the two phases that can coexist: the liquidus composition, xb liquid, and the solidus composition, xb solid.
and that tangent line is the visual solution to the equality of chemical potentials we just talked about, isn't it?
It's the graphical proof. The intercepts of that line, if you project them back to the pure A and pure B axes, represent the chemical potentials, Ga and Gb.
And because it's a single straight line.
The chemical potential values are shared by both the solid point and the liquid point. It's the graphical enforcement of G alpha equals G beta.
Okay, so here's where we turn this one snapshot into a full phase diagram. If we start lowering the temperature, what happens to those curves?
As temperature drops, the solid phase just becomes inherently more stable, so the entire solid AGM curve shifts downward relative to the liquid curve.
And the common tangent line has to adjust.
It has to find new tangency points on the new curves.
So if we trace the movement of those 2 contact points, the one on the solid curve and the one on the liquid curve, as we change the temperature, that locus of points traces out the solidus and the liquidus curves.
And that's it. You've just generated the entire lens phase diagram. For ideal solutions, the whole thing is governed only by the melting points and the heats of melting of the pure components. It shows you the incredible predictive power of pure thermodynamics.
Let's pivot slightly and talk about the reference point, the standard state. It's so important for consistency,
Right, because when you define activity, you need a baseline to measure from.
which is often just the pure component in its stable state. But you can choose other states.
And what's really critical to understand is that while changing your standard state will vertically shift the entire A to GM curve,
It changes the absolute numbers.
but it absolutely does not influence the position of those common tangency points.
So the equilibrium compositions, xb liquid and xb solid, are fixed no matter what reference frame you use.
Exactly. They're determined only by the intrinsic relative stability differences, and this leads to a really important relationship for activity. Let's take component B at a temperature below its melting point.
Okay, so pure solid B is more stable than pure liquid B.
Right, so if solid B is your stable reference, its activity, which we'll call ABS, has to be higher than the activity, ABL, if you had chosen the unstable liquid B as the reference.
So the activity of B measured with respect to the solid standard state is greater than the activity measured with respect to the liquid standard state.
It has to be, and the ratio between them is constant across all compositions at that temperature.
And that ratio is defined by that exponential term, xb degree metal RT. That keeps everything consistent.
It does. As T drops, the solid becomes even more stable, AG degrees gets more positive, and that ratio activities gets even bigger, reflecting that increased stability difference.
So the geometry is fixed by physics, and the standard state just shifts the axis without moving the critical points.
You've got it. It's how thermodynamics maintains its internal consistency.
Okay, let's move beyond the simple lens diagram and look at the thermodynamics behind systems with limited solubility, specifically eutectic systems.
So now A and B have different crystal structures. This means we have to consider three potential phases, liquid, and two solid solutions. We'll call them alpha and beta.
So three AGM curves competing for that lowest energy state.
Exactly. At very high temperatures, the liquid curve is lowest everywhere. As you cool down, the solid stability curves, alpha and beta, drop faster than the liquid one.
And at some point, the curves drop enough that we can draw two separate common tangents.
One linking the alpha solid to the liquid, and another linking the beta solid to the liquid.
And that defines our alpha plus L and beta plus L two-phase fields.
Right. But the real action happens when the liquidus compositions from those two tangents finally meet. That is the eutectic invariant reaction.
At one unique temperature, the eutectic temperature, TE.
At that one temperature, the system hits minimum Gibbs energy when all three phases coexist. And graphically, this means those two separate double tangents merge to form a single, perfect, triple common tangent.
Wow, a triple tangent touching the liquid curve, the alpha curve, and the beta curve all at the same time.
Right.
That's the visual confirmation of three phases in equilibrium at a fixed composition and temperature. That's exactly what the Gibbs phase rule describes as an invariant point.
And this same fundamental process, finding the minimum energy with common tangents, applies to all the other invariant reactions too. The eutectic, the monotectic, the peritectic.
That ability to predict these transformations just from energy is what makes these models so powerful. And the source material shows how we can even predict these topologies using regular solution models.
Yeah, these models use simple constants, alpha for the liquid and alphas for the solid, which just quantify the non-ideality, how much the components like or dislike each other.
So by just changing those alpha parameters,
By changing those mixing terms, you can calculate the complete shift in material behavior. You can watch it go from a simple lens diagram to forming a eutectic or even predicting a liquid miscibility gap for a monotectic. It's the whole thermodynamic roadmap.
let's wrap up by talking about the constraints on the final geometry of these diagrams. Thermodynamics imposes some pretty strict rules on the shapes of these phase boundaries.
It does. The first one is the Gibbs-Konovalov rule, which constrains the slope of the boundaries, the dTdx.
Okay.
This rule says that whenever two phase boundaries meet at a point where the compositions are identical, a congruent point, like a maximum in the solidus and liquidus, those curves have to intersect with a zero slope.
So if you see a diagram where the liquidus and solidus meet at a sharp point, a cusp,
That diagram is thermodynamically inconsistent. It has to be a smooth horizontal tangency.
okay, good rule of thumb. What else?
Then we have constraints from the third law of thermodynamics, which are crucial near absolute zero. As T approaches 0 Kelvin, the solubility of B in alpha and A in beta must approach 0.
That makes sense.
But more strikingly, the slopes of those solubility lines, the solvi must approach plus or minus infinity as the temperature goes to 0. It's a major geometric requirement for any diagram to be valid at very low temperatures.
Finally, we should probably distinguish between different kinds of transformation lines you might see on a diagram.
Yes, that's a good point. The source material notes that higher order transformations, like, say, the ferromagnetic Curie temperature line, can appear on phase diagrams.
But they're different.
They're different. They don't involve the exchange of heat in the same way as first-order transformations like melting or eutectic. And because of that, they do not follow the same thermodynamic constraints. The Gibbs phase rule isn't strictly valid for those specific lines.
This has been a really detailed walk through the thermodynamic engine room. I think the core takeaway for me is that the entire complex structure of a binary phase diagram is just a graphical output of which phase combination achieves the minimum Gibbs free energy.
For any given temperature and composition.
And the mechanism, the way we enforce that equality of chemical potential, is just visualized perfectly by the common tangent method.
And by accurately modeling the relative stabilities in those mixing terms, the alphas, we can precisely predict and understand how a material is going to behave.
We saw how just changing those regular solution parameters fundamentally dictates the resulting topology. It can shift a material from having complete solid solubility to a complex eutectic system. Which leaves us with a provocative thought. The classic Hume-Rothery rules describe solid solubility based on things like atomic size, crystal structure, and electronegativity. So how do those fundamental atomic scale characteristics manifest as measurable changes in these thermodynamic alpha parameters? How do they act as the bridge between basic chemistry and the macroscopic phase diagram we see?
That is the ultimate connection, isn't it? Understanding how atomic structure drives the energy calculation that then predicts the phase diagram topology that, guides all of industrial material design.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the thermodynamics of materials. We encourage you to keep exploring these crucial connections between energy, composition, and material stability.